Delson is the founder of the Peace
Mark
Initiative.
Delson is the founder of Peace Innovation Lab at Stanford, and he's discovered the magic formula to calculate peace in the world. Please welcome to the stage, Mark Nelson.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon. Are you having a good time? Which of the talks did you enjoy so far the most? All of them. That's a good answer. That's very diplomatic. I was very impressed with Mr. Marcus's very dystopian view of the future. The passing, what did you guys think about that? It was pretty impressive, wasn't it? So I'm here to try and give you the other side to that. I spent most of my last decade warning people that that's the future we're headed for unless we very deliberately, very intentionally try and design something different. And we started by looking at how can we actually measure peace. And it turns out, when we started doing that, it turns out technology is really good for measuring peace. And all of you who are using technology in your business, when we started measuring it, what we discovered is you are increasing positive engagement in the world, which, by the way, is actually peace. When you look at how to reduce violence, that's not peace, that's conflict reduction. And you reduce all the violence in the world, and you still don't have good behavior, you just have a lack of bad behavior. It's better, but it's not peace yet, right? So we started focusing on how to teach people to design technology that augments, leverages, improves people's ability to be good to each other. And then when we started measuring who's doing the most of this is where the story changes, and it's not about me and my lab anymore, or my team, or my amazing co-director, and all the work we've done over the last decade. Guess who it's about? It's about you, because business is doing far more for increasing positive engagement in the world than all the governments out there, than all the humanitarian sector, certainly far more than militaries, even which mostly deploy on humanitarian missions these days. Turns out, positive engagement, we can measure episodes of positive engagement. Those social round trips that Dan from Zynga was talking about, those little episodes between one person who's somehow different from you, and we can see their group differences, and we can see your group differences, and we can see that episode, and we can see what quality of engagement was that. When that happens, you are measurably increasing peace in the world. Sounds good, right? We got to talk a little bit about how that works, what's the connection, and to do that, we got to understand negative engagement a little bit. So I'm going to give you a tool here for how to think about this, and that helps you plot a roadmap through this space to get to the kind of outcomes you need to get to. And then I'll talk a little bit at the end about why it's so important that we help you get to those outcomes for the world. So here on the vertical, we're looking at quality of engagement. This is zero, obviously, is zero quality and negative engagement, because when most people think about peace, first thing that comes to their mind is not war or not violence. All right, so we got to look at what does negative engagement actually look like, and then here's quantity of engagement. Now we have a design space. We can start measuring episodes of that engagement. If you are, for example, in airlines, and you fail to let a young couple who've just had their wedding board the plane for their honeymoon, you can start tracking. Here's an episode of negative engagement. And if you then, one of your passengers tapes your steward or stewardesses insulting passengers and that goes viral, that's reaching far more people. It's not just that couple affected anymore. And then if one of your passengers' dogs dies in the overhead compartment, that starts getting worse and worse, right? And then, God forbid, they call the police and beat you up and drag you off the plane while everybody's videoing. When those kinds of things happen, we can see right away the relationship between this brand and their customers is going downhill. What's also happening at that moment is the relationship between all the group identities on both sides is going downhill. In those examples I just told you about, the relationship between Chinese people, Asian people in general, and that brand went downhill really quick because of the shared group identity in the last example. Now, when most people are thinking about peace, especially in a context like that, they're thinking, how do we intervene on this trend line and push it back in this direction quick? And there again, I just want to emphasize for you, That's what your crisis management people will tell you. That's what the PR people will tell you. It's certainly important to do that when you have a crisis, but that will not get you where you want to go. That will get you out of trouble, but you cannot save your way into the world you're trying to get into. So you need to be thinking instead about how do you get to positive engagement. By the way, things end there really quickly. That's also how the share price goes if you're that brand. So big lesson here is avoid this space whenever you can, but the best way to avoid this space is not to figure out how to do interventions on that trend line. The best way to avoid this space, which in the literature is called negative peace, by the way, and I want to just emphasize, it's just conflict reduction, conflict resolution. The best way is not to operate here at all. The best way is to start looking at how do you measurably increase positive engagement. What does that look like? To do that really well, there's a series of steps you have to go through. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is, yes, you're trying to get out there to the right, up and to the right. And in this design space up here, here's the good news. Nobody actually knows how good we can be to each other yet. As a species, even without using technology to increase our ability to engage with each other positively, we still don't know. We don't have a clue how good we can be to each other yet. This is uncharted territory. And as you'll see in a little moment here, a bunch of that uncharted territory is full of new wealth. So let's look at how you get up there. First of all, you got to make somebody aware. Person A, person B have to become aware of each other, or if you're a brand, your customer, by the way, everybody's a customer. It isn't just your employees. It isn't just the person paying you cash. It's also your employees. It's also your shareholders. It's also your regulators. It's also your suppliers, your distributors. They're all customers. They're just paying you in different kinds of currency. But you got to increase awareness between you and them. To do that, once you do that well, you can start eliciting attention. In this modern world with all these digital technologies, here's what I want you to see. These technologies augment our ability to do this. So an example of awareness technology, you have an alert on your phone that suddenly goes ding. Now you're aware somebody's trying to reach you. You start directing your attention to that. You see, oh, Ben sent me a text. You don't know what the text said yet, but you're well into the attention zone and you're moving towards communication. And here we have to go on a little side trip because this is the theme of the conference, squarely in the communication space, conversation. And I need you to see that this is pretty basic for some of you, but good to remember, there are two kinds of conversations. Conversation you have with your customer that you have full control of, and then the conversation your customer has about you to everybody else that you have very little control of. And the only way you can influence that is with the first conversation. But the magic all happens in the second conversation. That's where all the leverage is. That's where all the network effects are. Here's the other thing I want you to see. Conversation is a cost. It's an investment. You have to be prepared to make that investment, and you typically don't get your money back at the end of the conversation. We're going to talk later on the panel about ROI on these kinds of things. The ROI doesn't happen here, so be prepared to make that investment and be prepared to wait for the return on that investment. Two examples for why that second conversation is magic. How many of you have tracked how big Tesla's marketing budget is compared to every other major car company's marketing budget? Raise your hand if you've been tracking that. Okay, it's a tiny fraction of every other car company. They do no advertising, and they have a bunch of super passionate people who are out there advocating for them, being ambassadors of the brand. That's the kind of situation you really want to be in. You can move more of your value up the value chain that I'm showing you to where it really generates income if you don't have to spend it down there. The other reason it's magic, Robert Cialdini. Does that name ring a bell for anybody? All right, good. Some of you have read that. If you haven't, go read his books. When people say things about your brand themselves, rather than you saying it to them, they incorporate what they say into their identity. You are doing identity design at that moment. It's a sacred thing. Treat it like that. Okay, remember, not generating revenue, but it's vital to get to revenue. So if we come back to this framework, when you do communication well, you get those conversations, you get them positive, you get those second-order conversations happening. That enables coordination. By the way, communication technologies, Messenger, chatbots, Skype, all of these things, fairly obvious, right? If you do that well, then you can start saying, here's our web page, our store's located here, it's open at this hour, those kinds of things. Now we're squarely into the realm of coordination technologies. If you can do coordination really well, then you can start getting cooperation. Cooperation is where high-level stuff begins to be really interesting. By the way, for businesses, cooperation is something like when you have a major fight with another business, you don't hire somebody to follow them down a dark alley and break their kneecaps. You call your lawyer, and they call their lawyer, and you work it out over the next 3 years, and only the lawyers typically get rich off of this. But that's an amazingly high level of cooperation. And I use that example because it helps distinguish it from where we're trying to get to here. Above cooperation, augmenting technologies there, by the way, would be things like Google Docs. You all jump into a Google Doc, write a proposal together, and so on. You still haven't earned any money. Key point here, this is all positive, but unstable. So it's way better than anything in the negative space, but you got to work your way up the stack, and you're not getting anything back yet. The cost of engagement goes up at each of these levels, and the mutual benefit is lower than the cost of engagement. And so this can fall apart at any moment. But if you can get over this threshold to collaboration, defined as mutual benefit in excess of the cost of engagement, redistributed back over both parties, if you can get over that line, magic happens. An example of this kind of technology, how many of you have used Uber or a ride-sharing service like Uber in the last day getting around Prague? Okay. You were working up there because you can see Uber moves you through the whole stack. You pull out your phone, say, I need a ride. You've got awareness of the network, awareness of the algorithm, awareness of Uber right away. You say, I'm going here. They start directing the attention of their drivers towards you. They start communicating with their drivers right away. You start, bing, Jose is going to meet me over here at this time. Okay, I need to be there in 6 minutes. Now you're squarely into the coordination. You go get into his car, you open the door, you say hi, and you sit down. That is definitely cooperation at that point, and nobody has earned any money yet. Don't forget, nobody has earned any money yet. You haven't generated new wealth yet. But 7 minutes later, when you get out of the car, say thank you very much, and you rate him 5 stars, and you pay him a compliment, and you leave a tip, you have created new economic activity at that point that could not have happened any other way, couldn't have happened without that technology. You never could have found each other, never could have trusted each other, never could have settled a transaction like that. That's new wealth. And that new wealth, Uber can give some of it to the driver. You save a bunch in terms of the hassle that you would have had owning a car or renting a car in Prague and parking and so forth. And there's enough of that new wealth left over that Uber can invest in making the next ride for you or the next person a little bit better. Now, I'm using Uber on purpose precisely because they're a controversial example. And I want you to see, none of this stuff comes for free. There's always a social cost. There's no magic bullets here. But it's measurably better than some of the previous alternatives, at least in some ways. And from a brand perspective, as lousy as they've treated the women in their company, for example, as antagonistic as they've been with city governments and so forth, in spite of all that, because they got that far up the stack, they have time and cushion to hopefully work those things out with their new CEO. If they hadn't got over that threshold, they wouldn't have the time, they wouldn't have the cushion, they would have been out of business a while ago. So you're trying to get at least there, and if you can do that, because there's that little bit of new wealth that can be reinvested in making the next transaction even better, now you've got something that isn't just sustainable, it's scalable. This is where every business that succeeds is trying to get, and if you're succeeding, it's where you have gotten. And then, so the question is how to stay there, what other things does that enable, how much higher value can you create there? The key takeaway here is that's sustainable, that's scalable, and this is the domain that our lab works in. This is where we spend all our time investigating how do we help people get here, how do we help people stay here, and how do we help together design a world where we're all asking, how good can we be to each other? And we're all looking at how do we embed that into our technology so it happens as automatically as possible. And we're all thinking about how do we pay attention to those second-order effects? How do we drive that? And then that question mark, up and to the right again, I just want to remind you, nobody knows yet how good we can be to each other. And when you invent another technology that goes up that stack, or when you work with a brand that is trying to figure out how to get up that stack, or is up there and trying to figure out how to make it more beneficial for more people, you are helping to measurably increase positive peace in the world. Business people are the new heroes here. In many cases, there's a lot of people out there, there's kind of three basic beliefs about business and peace. There's a lot of people who are like, business is bad for peace. And then there's kind of the neutral position, well, it depends on how you do business, whether it's good for peace or bad for peace. And then we thought we were taking the strong position, which was business can be good for peace if you design it right. And then last year, at the Positive Peace Conference at Stanford, a young PhD student from Finland came to me, Tilman Bauer, and he asked me what I am calling now the Tilman-Bauer hypothesis. He said, Mark, I think we've got it all wrong. I think the purpose of business is peace. And profit is a really nice side effect. It's the reward we give each other for helping to create more peace. That's the fundamental value that allows everything else to be created. I think he's right. And as a person who's involved in helping to design the culture of your organization and how you treat all your stakeholders, you are a part of that mission, and you get to decide if you're going to design your business. So that's a big part of the value you create. So we're trying to help you get paid for that, because there's a big structural problem in the world. Right now, you don't even get recognized for all the peace you create in the world, let alone get paid for it. And when you don't get paid for it, obviously that's bad for your business, but guess who it's really bad for? It's bad for the rest of the world. Guess why? Because when you don't get paid for the peace value you create, you don't help to generate a price signal for the value of peace in global capital markets. And that means if there's no price signal for the value of peace, the money doesn't flow. All that, the money in your pension fund, the money in your health insurance fund, all those trillions and trillions of dollars that every day are looking for a good investment, the only good investments available to them, if you're not getting paid for peace, are non-peaceful investments. So it's vital that in fact you get paid for this. And to do this, we published a paper a few weeks ago. It will be live on the Frontiers of Psychology journal on a peace data standard. The City of The Hague and the Dutch government are working with us to make this the Hague Peace Data Standard, just like the Hague Convention. And what that enables is peace credits. What that enables is every business to report the peace they're creating in the same way and be issued peace credits that are just like carbon credits for peace. And if you want to be part of that, and I hope you do, I'm going to ask you to reach out to us now and see how we can work together on that. Thank you very much.